just get started. Dr. Giaveau just told me the last time there were 4 people here, so I guess we better not wait for a big audience or anything like that. Can you hear? Do I have to snap something on? How's that? For the 2 people who may not know me, I'm Daryl Guignion from the biology department, and I guess by profession I'm a teacher, and I do a lot of work in field biology and have been active for something like 23 years, I guess, in that particular area. In any case, what I wanted to talk to you about this afternoon is some of the work that we have been involved with in the Morell watershed. For those of you that have listened to the journal in the last 3 or 4 nights, you probably will have a fair appreciation of the sort of problems that we're facing not only in this country, but generally speaking right across the whole planet regarding pollution. It's pretty scary, and I guess it was scaring us probably long before it's now getting to the average person. And so about 20 years ago, a group of us decided that we were going to do something about some of the environmental problems, at least in our own home area. Start with, I want to read just a short quote from this book by Dunfield. Jonathan Carver, in his travels through the interior parts of North America in 1767, was mesmerized by the purity and appeal of the St. Lawrence River. The water was as pure and transparent as air, and my canoe seemed as if to hang suspended in that element. It was impossible to look attentively through this limpid medium at the rocks below without finding before many minutes were elapsed your head swim and your eyes no longer able to behold the dazzling scene. Compare that to the St. Lawrence River of today. A slight change. Now, as far as our group is concerned, and now there are groups all over Prince Edward Island, the changes that must occur to prevent or to stop this deterioration of habitat has to start at home. And I want to tell you about the sorts of things that our group has been doing. First of all, a few shots of pristine environment. This is the St. John River in Gaspé Peninsula in Quebec. And it's possibly as pristine a river as we have left in Canada, for that matter. There's no settlement along it whatsoever, and it's certainly the jewel of the Quebec government as far as research is concerned. And it is truly a spectacular river with the quality environment that was typical of most of our rivers in eastern Canada at one time. Another river draining from the Gaspé Peninsula, the Cascapedia River, gives you an idea of the clarity of the water. Those poles are normally close to 15 feet long. There's probably about 6 to 8 feet of water there, and yet you can see the rocks in the bottom of the river. Again, a magnificent river with no pollution along it and very, very little settlement. These are 2 of the finest salmon rivers left in the world. And they're so clean that you have to be careful when you're walking. When the water gets deeper, you know that you have to step very, very cautiously because you could go down 2 or 3 feet. You can't even tell the depth. The deeper it is, the greener it is. And even in 10 feet of water, you can still see the bottom in places. A truly magnificent river. Of course, the fish taken from them can be fairly impressive as well. These are two taken from, well, not that river, the York River. And obviously, very, very fine salmon. However, the story I want to tell you today is about our home river, one of the major rivers on Prince Edward Island. There's a couple larger, West River, Dunk River, and most of our rivers are smaller. And this is the village of Morell, located some 40-odd kilometers to the east of Charlottetown. I want to show you a few shots just to orientate you to the river itself. To begin with, this is what we call a watershed area. Following this red line around here, this is the total drainage basin for the Morell River, which drains into St. Peter's Bay and out to the North Shore. The estuary part of the river, that is where fresh water meets salt, starts here at St. Peter's Bay and extends upstream for about 8 or 9 kilometers to what we call Indian Bridge. And then further along, we have a freshwater stream, a main branch, which splits and splits again and so on. So a fairly large watershed with an excess of 17,000 hectares and a mix of habitat types. I'd like to start at the North Shore and work upstream on the Morell. For some of you, maybe you're familiar with this. This is what we call the Greenwich Peninsula. It's the area that had so much publicity over the last couple of years because of the proposed $44 million development for that particular site. The Morell River is directly across and flows into the bay just a little to the left there. So it's opposite the Greenwich sandhills. St. Peter's Bay is a narrow neck leading out to the sea and a very large bay that extends away up to the east to St. Peter's, some 12 kilometers long. And it, of course, is one of the most significant areas in PEI as far as the mussel fishery is concerned. It's where much of the spat is collected. It's also an area that we think can become a site for a new type of recreational fishery, a trawl fishery. And sites that we've been experimenting on include areas in the mouth of the river, out here, and just outside the sand spit. Just quickly then, going upstream on the Morell, the railway bridge crosses the mouth of the river here, a bit shallow here, and maybe in a sense does create more estuarine conditions further upstream. That is, a bit more flushing wouldn't hurt, and certainly quite a bit of freshwater influence from here on upwards. The village of Morell, of course, like most of our villages now, has a sewage lagoon, and we really don't have too many problems as far as pollution to the river. Just moving quickly upstream, you can see what the river looks like from the air. One of the noteworthy things of the Morell is all of this estuary portion here has a buffer zone, a green belt along the shoreline. This was established as a voluntary belt that was set up almost 2 decades ago now. In 1974 it was proclaimed by the provincial government under the Planning Act regulations, and it now has official protection. But prior to that, we contacted some 96 landowners along the river, and for the most part got their permission to establish a three chain that is approximately 60 meters zone on either side of the river, which would be very strictly protected. No development, no clear cutting, and a whole lot of other things. As you go further upstream, at Indian Bridge, we reach the head of tide, and above that is just a stream that wanders through a wooded territory. Very beautiful habitat, and certainly one of the most picturesque of the rivers that we have left on PEI that isn't settled to the edge. A little trouble with this lack of autofocus here. In any case, further upstream from Indian Bridge, we have a rather narrow stream, perhaps in the order of 20 to 30 meters wide, and it winds back and forth through a wooded area. We have 4 goals as regards our watershed. The first is to retain the Morell River as close to a wilderness river as possible. One of the prime ways of achieving that goal is through the establishment of the Greenbelt. In addition to that, we have a lot of other challenges, which include no more access to the river, no creation of footpaths along the river, and many, many other things like this. And so it becomes quite a problem in a settled place like Prince Edward Island to try to maintain some semblance of wilderness, because forever there seems to be someone that wants to develop it or cut it or put perhaps a fishing lodge in or whatever. And it seems like they can't comprehend the notion that you must maintain a decent buffer zone if you're going to maintain the quality of the habitat. And of course, it's always the person with a lot of money that tends to be the problem people. People often from outside the province who wish to buy chunks of the river and then make it into their own private domain. The river itself is very appealing from the point of view of not only the aesthetics, but has a nice riffle, pool, run sequences along. In reality, there has to be a lot more management, but even at this stage, we have a situation where it is very good habitat for quite a variety of species of fish. One of the prime fishing areas is at Grant's Bridge. This is a bridge where many people fish. All along this section and above is a major pool and a major holding area for both salmon and trout in the river. Further upstream a little bit, above Grant's, we have a fork and we have a west branch and an east branch. The east branch gets rather slow and lazy as it gets further up. Rather deep pools in places and a great area for fishing trout. Isolated though, hard to get to, and you have to be willing to walk or canoe. But in any case, a very attractive area. Further up still is a section of river which really is only brush marsh and a channel winding back and through. Every so often you have a beaver impoundment, and above it you get more open water, and so it goes on in places for miles. And this creates very special habitat for particularly waterfowl and fur bearers and other bird species and mammals generally. Another branch off that east section is in what we call the Everglades. This is a lower section. Above the bridge from this shot is a marsh that extends up for close to 100 hectares, I guess. And it's a major impoundment put in by Ducks Unlimited. All told, on the watershed, there are 8 major impoundments, some of them very large and others somewhat smaller. And we often have a problem with integrated use regarding these impoundments, because habitat that's excellent for waterfowl, and this is, it's shallow, there's all kinds of diversity of vegetation. It's excellent for waterfowl and fur bearers, but that same water the depth causes it to warm up and evaporate, and what's good for waterfowl and fur bearers can be very detrimental for sport fish. And so it's a juggling act. not only between these various groups of wildlife species, but also within a particular group of animals, such as fish. There are different requirements for different fish species. However, there are some basic ingredients that the river have that make it very special, and this is true perhaps of most of our rivers on PEI. They're spring-fed. There are a lot of springs in the Morell, more still on some of the other rivers like the West River and probably the Valleyfield River and some of the other larger systems on Prince Edward Island. These springs tend to keep the water cool in the summertime and somewhat warmer in the wintertime. And they're persistent, which means that a river the size of the Morell does not dry up in the summertime like it would if you were on, say, Nova Scotia or New Brunswick in most cases. And so we have not only permanent water throughout the year, good water temperatures, but because of the nature of the water and the inputs coming into the systems, quite rich water as well. We seldom have a problem with acid. The pHs of most of our river systems tend to be alkaline or very close to it. There are some exceptions of a couple of rivers that drain from bogs, but for the most part we don't have the major concern from acid rain that they would have, say, in southwestern Nova Scotia. Moving further upstream on the west branch, we arrive at a place called Leards Pond. Quite a long pond, extends maybe 1 kilometer in length, wooded all around. To give you an indication of the sort of development pressures, there's been a road put in this last couple of months that extends up through the woods there, across the river up here, and into that point there. And apparently some sort of a very large building. I've seen the size of the building. I assume it's some sort of a lodge to go in. This is black spruce swamp and an exceedingly hard place to put a road through. So it gives you an indication of the interest that's being shown by developers and by people from outside the area. The pond itself is extremely pleasant to fish in and to canoe in, and particularly in the evening coming down. It's so nice to be away from houses and from, even though you're fairly close, it seems like you're away from civilization. Moving way up the west branch, we come to a 40-hectare pond here called Pisquid Pond. This is the head of the west branch of the river. Many springs coming into the pond, and it feeds that branch of the river. The area around the pond is completely wooded and flooded in the spring in particular, an extremely good habitat for all kinds of bird species. Very, very dense concentrations of nesting birds, all kinds of passerines, all the way around the pond. In early spring, the pond looks a good deal like a pond you might see on the mainland. There's only one chunk of vegetation out this, a little bit of scirpus. Can't think of the common name. Scirpus, just a reed growing out in the water. And the rest of the pond is devoid of vegetation, looks like a big lake. All you can see when you get there is all kinds of birds and trout raising everywhere. Very attractive area. A little later on in June, as if from magic, from the bottom appears wild rice. It's a complete bed of wild rice. It comes up, bends over until about mid-June, and all of a sudden you'll go back one day and it stands up straight. And we end up later on with a dense field almost of wild rice. This is prime food for wildlife species. It also is good enough quality to be harvested, and in autumn, late August and September, early October, someone harvests this wild rice with airboats, and he takes a lot of rice out of this particular pond. But what's important, of course, from our perspective, is that the area is a magnificent place for all kinds of wildlife. I'll just zero in on one group, and we'll ignore the major groups of, say, passerine birds or other types of wildlife, just to give you an indication of the sorts of species that nest on this one pond in the watershed. Black ducks are quite common, as are green-winged teal, blue-winged teal, and pintails. Populations of gadwalls are increasing. Ringneck ducks are common breeding birds on this and a few other ponds on Prince Edward Island. Baldpates seem to be increasing. American widgeons, another name for them. And even some of the more rare birds are now seen to be showing up, including the mallard, much to the dislike of some wildlife biologists because they hybridize with the blacks. Shovelers, wood ducks, and even an occasional Canada goose attempts to nest on the pond. Now, nesting season doesn't seem to be the busiest time of the year, though. Although on different years, I have estimated a total of about 50 broods produced on this pond alone, in the 100-acre pond. However, in autumn, at dark, waterfowl comes from all directions of the compass to spend the night and feed on the waste rice in the pond. So it's an exceptionally important wetland. It has its share of fur bearers, such as these muskrat lodges, and many hundreds of muskrats as well inhabit the pond and the area around it. Beavers occur in the pond and actually occur all along the river, but we have an agreement with them that we leave them alone if they're far upstream, but if they're far down, they either have to be live trapped or their dams removed, one or the other. However, since we've been doing work with them, they've pretty well cooperated and stayed up where they're supposed to be. That's partly because once the work is done on the river, it's very difficult for them to get their initial sticks to stay on the bottom of the river. And so we haven't had too much problem with them. Of course, if they build a big dam near the entrance of the river, fish cannot go over the dam, and it ruins sea-run fish stocks such as trout and salmon. Our second major goal for the Morell was to improve habitat for fish and wildlife. No small task. And one that we're progressing on, but we really feel is going to probably take us at least another decade or maybe two to reach our goals. When we started far up the system, this is what we were confronted with. Streams, many tributaries completely clogged with fallen spruce or beaver dams and choked in with watercress and other vegetation, and a little bit of water flowing here and there, but completely blocked to any migrating fish population, and actually a rather discouraging situation. However, the old-time fishermen said those were the sites where the salmon used to spawn, and they would quote time and time again how many salmon they could fork in a night in these areas. So obviously there had to be fish there. So we started work, including taking huge logs off the bottom. Every time a tree falls across the river, it slows up the water, and as you know, on PEI, with all the silt-laden water, when the water slows up, it drops its load, and the process of starting to form impoundments starts. So it was a big task, and it really took years to clean up the river properly. But this is what it looks like when it's finished. A stream that's starting to get the natural flow of pool, followed by a swifter area and so on, and natural vegetation along the banks. We have in places transplanted hardwood species, and we're trying to, what we call, restructure the floodplain vegetation to what it should be, rather than, in many cases, the white spruce stands that are collapsing because of their age and because they're inappropriate vegetation for the stream edge or bank. The bottom itself is starting to take on characteristics that we like to see. A mix of different types of rock, quite large boulders, gravel, pebbles of various size, and as you can see, loaded with all kinds of invertebrates. Because of the good water quality, the amount of invertebrate life produced is quite outstanding in these rivers on Prince Edward Island. And of course, that provides food for all the animals living within the system. In addition to the cover that's provided by the rock material or the vegetation grown on the bottom, or perhaps the depth that's created by pools, which is a form of cover, we have added what we call split logs, just logs split down the middle and the flat side down, propped up off the bottom with a 6x6 block and a rebar driven down into the bottom 2 or 3 feet. We put many hundreds of these in, and they're used, of course, for cover for fish. They're parallel to the current, and they don't stop the flow nor collect silt. They work quite well. There are many other techniques that have been tried, and we will be working with this over the next few years to increase cover. As well, some sections of the river have had gabions put in to speed up the water flow and create pools. In a few areas, we have renovated some of the old pools that were there formerly before some of the problems, such as siltation, started to really take hold, especially in the 60s and 70s. And so some places like this now have pools that are similar to what they were, say, 50 years ago. Mind you, not as deep yet, because, again, some of the old fishermen tell us, we don't have much recorded, unfortunately, but they tell us about what the river was like back in those days. We have a bit of information that supports what they're saying. For instance, in the 30s, it wasn't unusual in the Morell to trap close to 1,000 salmon. For spawning purposes. The eggs were taken to the Kelly Fish Hatchery over here in Bunbury, or Southport, and from there they were sent all over the place, not just PEI, but Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and everywhere. So at one time, this was a pretty spectacular river, even though it's a very small one. Our major problem now that we're trying to handle, and have been for a few years, is to deal with the siltation problem. We have 4 main sources where the silt comes from: forestry activities, erosion of the banks in and along the streams, and agricultural runoff, and highway construction and maintenance. We actually are down to this 4th one now. The others are pretty well under control, not completely, but they're not the major problems right now. This is the one that we're concentrating on at the moment, and it is a tough one because any of the clay roads within the watershed tends to erode out like this in the spring. Some of these ruts, although it doesn't look it, are 2 to 3 feet deep, and the ditch, which should be up here, of course, is in the road. This was impassable with a 4-wheel drive last spring, and that sort of silt runs down and into the brook. Down the brook, into the pond, and if it's not held up there, out to the estuary, where it plugs up the estuary. And of course, a century ago, many of our estuaries all around the island were deep. We had shipbuilding industry in many of these sites. They could sail the boats in and out. In most of those sites now, you'd have difficulty paddling a canoe. And that is primarily due to the amount of material, sediments, that have been removed from the uplands and transported to the estuary sites. Wherever the water slows up, whether it's a place like this, like Leards Pond, or further downstream, the sediments drop. At the upper end of Leards Pond, this was an area that was between 5 to 10 feet deep when I first fished it. Now, there's a sandbar, if you can call it that, which extends probably close to 300 meters, and it comes right to the surface. So if you want to calculate with that width the amount of silt that's come down the river, it gives you an impression of how much was in there and had accumulated over the decades. This is again a major problem, is to try to rejuvenate systems once they have been downgraded like that. And we don't have time to wait to perhaps get the green paper accepted or whatever. We really have to get at this problem now on Prince Edward Island, and not only here, elsewhere in Canada as well, because the longer we wait, the harder it is to do anything about reclaiming some of these sites. We did excavate one pond over the last 2 years, Mooney's Pond. It's 300 meters long. I'll show it to you in a minute. It cost us $61,000 to clean the silt out of it. So it gives you an idea of the expense and the problems if you don't do something with that problem at the source. Of course, other than pavement, gravel would be ideal. It's what we want on most of the clay roads. However, with a budget of, is it 11 million or something like that this year for pavement, it is extremely difficult to get any amount of money for consolidation of sites that are causing major problems to many of our river systems. Some of the things that we do and have done are as shown here at Indian Bridge. The former ditch went down here directly to the river. So what we did is diverted the ditch off through the woods, made a number of barricades, if you wish, using, in this case, straw. Now we would use gabions, that's wire baskets filled with rock. Periodically, we'd clean out the silt above them. And when you have a few of these, the water getting to the river may be colored a bit, but it has no sediments much in it. And the colored water is not going to do any harm, at least not physical damage, either to the young or the adult fish. As well, what we have done in the past is created sort of these little dam-like affairs along the ditch and let the water run through the middle. Again, we've changed techniques here quite a bit, but the same principle applies. And the main problem that we encounter, apart from setting these up, which are quite time-consuming, is maintenance of them. We don't have, on Prince Edward Island, a fund to keep the sites that we have protected maintained. Each of our districts, our political districts, have something like $25,000 for their road maintenance program. And of course, there are many demands on that, and they keep telling us they can't do anything else. If they spend their money in a situation like this, they can't do it in some other part of the district. And since it's very politically motivated, it's very difficult to get much work done. The final product, of course, has to be stabilized. And again, we run into many problems here, particularly with timing of either the maintenance or construction, so that the seeding can be done preferably before mid-September, if it's to catch properly. Okay, those are just some of the things that we've been doing regarding habitat improvement. A third objective is to increase the populations of both trout and salmon. Now this is a real chore, because as we have improved the habitat, so we have intensified the use. And the opening day last fishing season in '89, our conservation officers counted no fewer than 100 vehicles parked at the bridge at Morell. And of course, each of them probably with several fishermen. And that's only one access point to the river. There are several. In fact, there are many. So it gives you an idea of the sort of pressure that's starting to develop. Partly it's because of the history of the river, but mostly it's because people are not getting trout or opportunities for other pursuits on other river systems, and they're turning to the Morell. And the enhancement, of course, has made it that much more popular. These are beautiful salmon. That one would probably weigh between 12 to 15 pounds. That's somewhat larger. And they utilize whatever cover is available. I cheated a bit here. These aren't shots from the island, but they are Atlantic salmon, and we do have salmon that size now coming back into the Morell River. The bottom, we hope, will one day look like this. Boulders, pebbles, everything. This is the sort of bottom that we're striving for. And it's down there. It just has to be uncovered and properly managed. There's a lot of work to do after it's uncovered, though. Now, apart from improving habitat and thus increasing populations of wildlife, whether it be in the zone adjacent to the river or within the river itself, we've attempted to go a different route, and that is because the rivers are so short, we decided to use what we call semi-natural rearing for enhancing populations. We feel that there's a limit to how many fish that can be produced on any given river system on Prince Edward Island through the wild habitat that's there. However, there are other techniques that can be used for creating many more fish than that. And if you can use techniques that will grow fish to a certain size and then send them out to the ocean to grow into mature fish, then you got a system that will probably work very well and produce much more than you could in the natural habitat. So at Leards Pond, we have a barrier in the river. Looking at it, I don't really know how that's possible. But anyway, I just looked at these, and it did not turn a single slide. This, oh, I've lost it. Something is going on.
It's not moving?
No. Will it sharpen a little more, Lawson? Sorry about that. Okay, thank you. This is the river. It flows north, actually, but that road is out. But the barrier is here, and so it blocks off access for any fish going up. It forces the fish to go up a fish ladder here, covered with grates, to a trap at the top. Laird's Pond is above. In the trap above, all the fish coming up that are above a certain size are caught. And this is an Atlantic salmon that's taken. This particular fish, salmon, is a male taken late in the season. You can tell by the kype on the front of it. We try to, first of all, capture enough fish for conservation purposes. We take the early run fish because the original fish that were there when we started came in October, November, too late to be angled. So we've now selected for a genetic stock that comes in the river earlier. And each year, the fish that are taken for stripping for eggs are those that arrive early, unless it's for aquaculture. And so during June in particular, several hundred fish, probably 200 to 300, are taking all the mature fish as well as some of the 3 or 4 pound, 5 pound grills are taken, and these are used for stocking purposes later on. The adults are taken to the Cardigan Fish Culture Station, a federal station, and here they're held during the summer. And in spawning season, in October, early November, the fish are stripped of their eggs and the proper genetic crosses are made to select for the type of strain that we wish to have. Now, for the first year, These eggs are well, they're laid down in October, November. They're kept in the hatchery over winter, and as is typical in the wild, they hatch out in spring. Now, normally there are a lot of problems out in the rivers with eggs being choked out because of silt or because of predation, etc. So there's a large loss of the eggs and young fish. In the hatchery, this does not occur. And so, very high success rate from the eggs that are laid down. And these young fish that hatch out are kept in the hatchery for a period of about a year, where they are fed and they grow. Now, traditionally what happened was they were kept until they were ready to go to sea, and then they were released. The problem with that is when you have a lot of fish in a small container in a hatchery, they are too close to each other. Not only do they get disease problems occasionally, but they tend to have poor shape, their fins tend to erode, and the fish that leave to go to sea are often in such bad shape that very few of them return. And time again, hatcheries have as few as 1% of the salmon that leave to go to sea as small fish that come back as adults. That is probably a break-even point. And so we were trying to develop a technique that would work better. So while the fish were quite small, they're kept in the hatchery. When they grow a little larger, what we do is move them out to a place like this, which is Mooney's Pond. It's a long pond, about 300 meters long, 350 meters long. It has been drained, shaped, and all other fish removed from it. And they're placed in the pond. There's a natural flow that comes through, and as well, they're periodically fed every day through the summer and fall for one season. And by the next spring, they've grown large enough that they're ready to go to sea. Now, salmon are sort of interesting in that in the rivers, they tend to, when they're young, they tend to have little territories and defend them against other members of their species. But in the spring of the year that they go to sea, their behavior changes completely. No longer do they orientate upstream, but they also not only face downstream, but they develop schooling characteristics and many other changes which enable them to go from fresh water directly to salt water. So we essentially only have to pull the plug on the dam, and away the salmon go out to sea, where they will spend, this is what they look like when they leave the fresh water, and they'll spend a year or two at sea. They'll leave perhaps 6 or 7 inches as smolts. They'll go to sea, come back after one winter if they do, as grills weighing from 3 to 5 pounds. If they stay at sea for a couple of years, they will return as multi-sea winter fish that'll weigh 8 to 10 pounds if it's 2 years, perhaps as much as 15 to 20 pounds if they stay out for 3 years. Now, you'll note the characteristics of the fins of these fish. They're excellent smolts, very comparable to wild smolts. The percent return from sea from the fish that we have sent out from the experimental basis has been from 7 to 13%, as opposed to perhaps 1% from the hatchery. Very comparable to wild stocks, which means it can be an extremely profitable venture if we raise them in semi-natural situations like at Mooney's Pond. Fourth goal is to increase the opportunity for quality recreational pursuits, such as bird watching or photography or angling or what have you. And this is in direct contrast to the first goal, to maintain a river as close to a wilderness condition as possible. And these, I think, are both very valid goals, but very difficult to attain, because we have innumerable conflicts that have to be resolved. And it's an ongoing problem with public awareness and involvement, and particularly public education to uses of the river. One of the prime uses, always has been, and we hope to continue, is angling. Our objective within 5 years is to have a salmon run of 5,000 fish returning to the Morell. Some of them will be fish like this, grills stayed out for 1 year. Others will be fish that are considerably bigger. And we hope to be able to supply fish like this in the Morell within that period of time. As well as dealing with salmon, there's an intensive effort to try to enhance the brook trout populations. With the increased angling pressure, this is imperative. And so we have selected for large sea-run fish in autumn, and with the fish culture station, they've collected these fish, stripped the eggs from them, and used them as the breeding stock for new generations of trout. Again, it's very difficult because there are so many other rivers requiring fish stocks that it's hard to use the results from this stripping of eggs just from the Morell. But we have plans for reintroducing sea-run trout to several of the tributaries where blockages have prevented them from having access in the past. And we hope to increase the population of trout as well as salmon. The eggs are stripped, they're kept in the hatchery and later released. Our objective is not to have anglers going and taking a dozen trout, but rather to provide a quality experience. And this is one of the prime considerations. We want to have an outing where people who go fishing or canoeing or any of these other pursuits will really thoroughly enjoy a river that has a lot of opportunities. And this is the sort of future we see for the Morell. We think it's quite acceptable to have all kinds of uses, provided we can control them. And things like canoeing is becoming more and more popular. I was hoping Wei Ching and Lucy would be here because I was going to comment on the people that couldn't stay in the canoes. But however, since they aren't here to appreciate it, we won't say too much. One of the major problems we have, of course, as I mentioned, is public awareness and involvement. And through various techniques, these people have been involved not only with work on the Morell, but on many other systems. And during the summer now, there are something like perhaps 60 to 70 people involved with enhancement or other types of work, primarily on or near our rivers now. The future, I feel, is very bright. I say this even when thinking of some of the things I mentioned when we first started about how habitat is declining and how many problems we have with acid rain and long-range transport of pollutants generally, and how many dams are going in. Practically every major river in the U.S. is dammed up. Many of our Canadian rivers are being dammed and so on. But I think now the public on Prince Edward Island, as well as the Canadian public, is becoming aware that jobs may be important, but there's something else that's more important, and that is the health of our present populations and the future for our children and our grandchildren. And without these activities, not only starting now, but really accelerating in the next few years, we won't have that. And I think most islanders now feel that they're willing to pay for it if necessary. You can. Well, questions?
What about the cooperation that you're getting from the, you mentioned especially the roads being a problem, and you mentioned also difficulty of getting money to maintain what has been done. And we saw something where I presume the road people were doing that mulching, was it? Do you find you're getting better cooperation from the road people to?
It's slow, but coming. And by that I mean if you look back 10 years, we had some very few examples that we could use of proper use. We have developed special slide presentations, for instance, just for the Department of Energy and Transportation. And with the adoption of the conservation strategy by the provincial government, we have been able to get to a lot of the different departments. And so, for instance, we have had sessions where all of the employees from the grader operators on up to the deputy minister have come in, and we've participated in workshops and pointed out certain things that have directions that we have to go. Generally speaking, the people that are out there doing the work believe fully in the fact that we have to curtail some of these problems. The problem usually is that there are political demands, and they can't spread their money any thinner, and it can't be done. We're getting places. There's one hydroseeder, for instance, that's in operation much of the time from midsummer onward, but there's a second hydroseeder that's not used at all. So we're starting to, I think, see some real results, and certainly activities such as the Morell River watershed project, which demonstrated again different uses, different techniques for stopping sediments, has been very useful as well. And it certainly doesn't hurt to have the Minister of the Environment from down our area. However, time and time again I hear the statement that we have to work as partners, and there's environmental partners funds, and federal people keep talking about partnerships and so on. Our communities are ready and have been working at this actually for years now. The provincial government certainly has commitment, and again has put a fair bit of money and new programs into place, but it's dreadfully hard to get a penny from the feds. It's like, I can't tell you how difficult it is to get help from them.
Other aspect, not the same, but related. First of all, you've been commended for the activity that you put into yourself and I'm sure you must have a feeling of satisfaction to see things progressing as they are. What about the people in the community? Have you found, you referred a couple times to the older fellows in the community. Now they're seeing some of this return. How are they reacting to it, and how is there a feeling in the community for what's happening? What is the sense there?
Yeah, it's a mixed reaction, I guess. There's certainly a lot of pride in the river. That was shown when they agreed to set up the Greenbelt. There's also, I guess, a little bit of, not a little, quite a lot of friction, in the sense that they often blame the townies for running the four-wheel drives through their grain crops, or leaving the gates open, or cutting down trees and setting fires and littering and so on. And these are all problems that we have to deal with. And certainly they're not small tasks. But for the most part, we get pretty good cooperation. We have in our co-op that's responsible for management of the river 9 people involved, and there is different chairmen looking after different sectors of the work now. And so that generates interest. And for instance, if we needed to have someone, say, put up Mooney's, the building at Mooney's, it's not difficult to get, say, 15 or 20 people out to help you. Other questions?
How about the stocking program? What numbers do you think you're going to be putting in over the next few years?
That all depends on how successful we are in some of our endeavors. This is pretty new science, really. It hasn't really been done in this manner. In Newfoundland, they have semi-natural rearing, but only to the small par stage, and then a fingerling, and then they release the fingerlings. So we're hoping to be able to produce from 50 to 100,000 smolts from Mooney, somewhere in that range. We will not know for sure for another year or two how successful we will be. Again, depends a lot on federal support. It's their jurisdiction, but we cannot get a penny from them, for instance, for food to feed the fish or for things like that. It gets really very trying at times to keep these things going. The co-op itself, or the people like myself, of course, get no return whatsoever, in the sense that the fish that are coming back belong to everyone and are angled. The regulations prohibit us, for instance, presently from having any kind of terminal harvest or any kind of return from the fishery. So we're sort of in a bind. We're sort of a catch-22. We're required to produce the fish if we're going to proceed onward. On the other hand, we can't get the money to keep it going. We can, but it's very difficult.
The salmon enhancement program that has been set up across Canada, I suppose there were certain big rivers in mind when they adopted that policy.
What policy?
Salmon enhancement program. And
that was a figment of Sidden's imagination.
Yeah, what I'm saying, coming out here is a lot of times PEI is a little spot off in the Atlantic Ocean somewhere, and if they give us something to console us for the time being. But the question is this: with the kinds of returns that were actually witnessed, in comparison with returns in other systems, would be enough to raise a few eyebrows. And I'm wondering what the reaction from the feds would have been upon seeing those kinds of figures.
Well, certainly, see, one of the problems is in eastern, if you look at the Gulf region, that's how we're set up, in the fisheries and oceans set up with the Gulf, which extends around the Gulf essentially. PEI, New Brunswick, western coast of Newfoundland, that's called the Gulf region. Well, within that Gulf region, you can ask the question, well, how many biologists do you have working? And over the last few years, there's been a gradual cutback in the person years that's available to do research. Those that have been doing research, and Ron Gray is responsible for much of the semi-natural rearing work here in the Maritimes, have certainly some friendly competition. And Mike Chadwick in New Brunswick, for instance, has gone the route of enhancing wild rivers, while Ron Gray has gone the route of semi-natural rearing. But really, when you think of the workload, and Ron is responsible for PEI, the Gulf region of Nova Scotia, and the western section of Newfoundland. We're talking about hundreds of rivers. How could you possibly do any work on that? I mean, it's just not even realistic to think that you could do anything. And so, particularly when you consider the amount of reports and that have to be written, so a lot of the material and successes never get heard of further up the chain. And it really, there's a large bureaucracy. There's very few people working in the field. But once you get above that, there's all kinds of managers and director generals and assistant deputy ministers and deputy minister and so on. There's a whole long list of bureaucratic people that twist and turn things around. And I've been told many, many times by friends that actually do the work that they'll send a proposal up the tube. By the time it gets to the top, they can't even recognize it anymore. And of course, they have to modify it, and then the spinning keeps going. And so you just get nowhere. It's just an incredibly cumbersome system. Whether they know what successes we have or not, I can't really say. I know some of the biologists do, and they're certainly looking at that.
There's no question it's dramatic in terms of what,
Yep. Well, thank you all very kindly for showing up. I'm glad the contingency came from the biology department, or else we'd have been very lonely here.